Welcome back to the Primary Text. I'm Adam. I want you to try something with me. Think about the people who made you who you are. Not just your parents, though certainly them, but think wider. Think of the teacher who saw something in you before you saw it yourself, who called forward a capacity you didn't know you possessed. The friend who told you the truth when flattery would have been easier and more comfortable. The stranger whose single act of kindness shifted something in your understanding of what humans could be. The difficult person who, by their very difficulty, taught you patience you didn't know you needed. Think of the colleague whose quiet competence raised your own standards, the author you never met whose words rearranged your interior furniture, the grandparent whose stories planted seeds that only flowered decades later, the mentor who didn't just teach you skills but modeled a way of being in the world, the enemy, perhaps, whose opposition clarified what you actually stood for. We carry these people with us. Their voices echo in our decisions. Their examples shape our responses to situations they never imagined. We are, in ways we rarely acknowledge, walking composites of everyone who ever touched our lives. Now imagine writing it all down. Every debt, every lesson, every quality you absorbed from someone else, acknowledged plainly and without embarrassment. Imagine sitting with pen in hand and actually cataloging your formation. Not your achievements, your origins. Not your accomplishments, your debts. Imagine naming each person and specifying exactly what you received from them. Most of us never do this. We vaguely know we've been shaped by others, but we rarely make it explicit. We talk about self-improvement as though the self were a solo project. We celebrate independence and self-reliance. We construct narratives of our lives that emphasize our own agency, our own choices, our own will. But what if we started from a different place? What if we began any serious examination of how to live with a radical acknowledgment of everything we've received? What if humility wasn't just a virtue to cultivate, but the very foundation of wisdom? This is how the most powerful man in the ancient world chose to begin his private journal. Not with his achievements, not with his authority, not with the military victories or the administrative accomplishments or the philosophical principles he spent a lifetime studying. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, commander of legions, ruler of an empire stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia, absolute sovereign over 60 million souls, begins the Meditations with a simple, radical, almost shocking act. He begins with gratitude. He begins by saying, "I did not make myself." There's something almost counterintuitive about this. We might expect a Stoic text to start with principles, with doctrines, with the nature of the universe or the structure of the soul. We might expect the private journal of an emperor to begin with the burdens of power or the challenges of rule. Instead, Marcus opens with 17 acknowledgments of debt, 17 entries naming the people who shaped him, 17 ways of saying, before I can tell you how I try to live, let me first tell you who taught me how to try. Book 1 of the Meditations is unlike anything else in the ancient world. It's a systematic accounting of formation. A philosopher-emperor pausing before he examines death, duty, or the nature of the universe to acknowledge everyone who contributed to the person he became. His grandfather's temper, his mother's piety, a teacher who warned against charlatans and miracle workers, a friend who modeled philosophical consistency under pressure. An emperor who preceded him and showed what conscientious power could look like. The list moves from family through teachers to the gods themselves. It covers biological inheritance, moral example, intellectual formation, and what we might call spiritual gifts. It's comprehensive in its scope and specific in its details. This isn't vague appreciation, it's precise acknowledgement. From this person I learned this, from that person I received that. 17 entries, 17 acknowledgments, 17 ways of saying, I am not self-made. And here's what strikes me most about this opening. Marcus wrote the Meditations for himself. They were never meant for publication. No one was supposed to read these words except the man who wrote them, which means this act of gratitude wasn't performance. It wasn't virtue signaling for an audience. It was a practice. It was a deliberate exercise in remembering his debts before examining his principles. The emperor of Rome, alone with his thoughts, choosing to begin his philosophical journal by acknowledging that everything he has, everything he knows, everything he's become, was received from others. This is where we begin today. and I think it tells us something essential about everything that follows in the Meditations. So if you want to understand Marcus Aurelius, start here. Start with his humility. Start with his recognition that wisdom doesn't emerge from nowhere. It's transmitted, person to person, generation to generation, teacher to student, parent to child, friend to friend. It's embodied in the lives of those who came before us. It's received from others, and then, if we're fortunate, if we do our work well, passed on to those who come after. Before Marcus can philosophize about death, he acknowledges his teachers. Before he can examine the nature of the cosmos, he catalogues human influences. Before he can offer prescriptions for the good life, he names the people who showed him what the good life looked like. This is not a preamble to skip. This is the foundation of everything that follows. This is Season 1, Episode 2 of the Primary Texts. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. This podcast is freely available to everyone. You don't need to be a member of anything. You don't need any special background in philosophy, and you don't need to have read these texts before. We're here to read them together, slowly and completely, taking the time these works deserve. That said, I'd recommend going back to Episode 1 before continuing with today's exploration. In that introduction, we covered essential ground: who Marcus Aurelius was, the extraordinary circumstances of his life, the Stoic philosophical tradition he inherited, and why the Meditations have endured for nearly 2,000 years. We explored how a Roman emperor came to write private philosophical exercises that were never meant for publication, and why those intimate reflections continue to speak to anyone seeking to live well amid chaos. Understanding that context will deepen everything we encounter today. For those who were with us last time, you'll remember we ended with a question. What would it mean to actually read this text as Marcus wrote it? Not as a collection of quotable fragments, not as ancient self-help, but as a complete philosophical practice? What would we find if we gave the Meditations the same careful attention we might give to a friend's most intimate letters? Today we begin to answer that question. We're starting with Book 1, sometimes titled Debts and Lessons in English translations. It's the shortest book in the Meditations, and in some ways the most unusual. Where the later books are filled with Stoic doctrine, cosmic reflections, and practical exercises for maintaining equanimity, Book 1 is pure acknowledgment, pure gratitude, a systematic accounting of everyone who contributed to the person Marcus became. There are 17 entries in total. Some are brief. Some are extended meditations on a single teacher's influence. Together they form something remarkable, a map of one man's formation written by that man himself, for his own eyes only. Let's begin. Before we enter the text, we need to understand the world that produced it and the man who wrote it. As discussed last time, Marcus Aurelius became emperor in 161 CE at the age of 40. He would rule for nearly 2 decades until his death in 180 CE. But calling him emperor can mislead us. The role wasn't what we might imagine from later European monarchies. Marcus was simultaneously head of state, commander-in-chief, chief priest, supreme judge, and administrator of an empire spanning 3 continents. The burdens were immense. Within his first year as emperor, the Parthian Empire invaded Rome's eastern territories. He spent years managing that conflict from Rome, while his co-emperor Lucius Verus led troops in the field. When the legions returned victorious, they brought something worse than defeat: the Antonine Plague, probably smallpox, which would kill millions across the empire over the following decades. Then the Germanic tribes along the Danube began pressing southward. For most of his reign, Marcus campaigned personally on the northern frontier, living in military camps far from Rome's comforts. It was during these campaigns, by lamplight in tents pitched against the cold, that he wrote much of what we now read as the Meditations. The circumstances matter because they shape the text. This isn't armchair philosophy. It's philosophy written under pressure, during brief moments of quiet stolen from the demands of empire. When Marcus writes about facing death with equanimity, he's writing as someone who has watched soldiers die. When he counsels patience with difficult people, he's writing as someone who spent years negotiating with tribal chiefs, managing court politics, and adjudicating disputes where any decision would make enemies. There's something curious about Book 1 that scholars have long debated. Unlike the fragmentary meditations of later books, Book 1 is structured, systematic, even formal in its presentation. It reads less like private notes and more like a deliberate composition. This raises a question: who was Book 1 actually for? The later books of the Meditations are clearly internal. Marcus addresses himself directly, argues with himself, criticizes himself. But Book 1 has an almost public quality. It presents the philosopher-emperor's formation in orderly fashion, as if preparing a record. Some scholars have speculated that Marcus wrote Book 1 with his son Commodus in mind. As heir apparent, Commodus would need to understand the tradition he was inheriting. Book 1 could have served as a kind of ethical will, a document showing the next emperor what standards he should aspire to meet. If this speculation is correct, it adds poignancy to the text. Commodus would become one of Rome's most notoriously bad emperors, undoing much of what Marcus built and embodying almost none of the virtues Marcus catalogues. The careful record of formation would have failed to form. Others suggest Book 1 was Marcus's way of bearing witness. By naming his teachers and acknowledging his debts, he was ensuring they wouldn't be forgotten. Rusticus, Apollonius, Maximus. These men would have passed into obscurity without Marcus's mention. Book 1 preserves them. It says, "These people mattered. What they taught me shaped the world." Whether for Commodus, for posterity, or simply for himself, Book 1 has an outward-facing quality that distinguishes it from the rest of the Meditations. It establishes public context before the private work begins. Marcus inherited a philosophical tradition that had been developing for nearly 5 centuries by his time. Stoicism was founded in Athens around 300 BCE by Zeno of Citium. By Marcus's day, it had become the most influential philosophy in the Roman world. The Stoics taught that virtue is the only true good. External things, including wealth, health, reputation, and even life itself, are indifferent. They're not bad, but they're not genuinely good either. What matters is how we respond to whatever happens. The sage, the Stoic ideal, maintains equanimity regardless of circumstances. This might sound like resignation or passivity. It isn't. The Stoics were intensely engaged with the world. They believed in duty, in service to community, in active participation in political life. What they rejected was attachment to outcomes. Do your work, fulfill your responsibilities, but don't tie your happiness to results you cannot control. Marcus received this tradition through multiple teachers. Rusticus introduced him to Epictetus, the former slave whose teachings would become central to Marcus's practice. Apollonius modeled unwavering steadiness. Maximus demonstrated how philosophical principles could be lived without rigidity. Book 1 is, in part, Marcus's acknowledgment that he didn't invent this approach to life. He received it. The wisdom he'll deploy throughout the Meditations was transmitted to him by specific people whose influence he can trace and name. The text itself. Now we enter Book 1 directly. I'll be reading substantially from the text, pausing to explore, explain, and interpret. We're not summarizing here. We're dwelling with Marcus's words. Nar. Family. The first formations. Marcus opens with family. Listen to how he begins.
From my grandfather Verus, I learned good morals and the government of my temper. From the reputation and remembrance of my father, modesty and a manly character. From my mother, piety and beneficence, and abstinence, not only from evil deeds, but even from evil thoughts, and further, simplicity in my way of living, far removed from the habits of the rich.
Notice the precision. His grandfather Verus taught him good morals and the government of my temper, not just ethics in the abstract, but the practical skill of managing emotional reactions. This is Stoicism in action. The grandfather modeled it. The grandson absorbed it. His father died when Marcus was young, so he learned from reputation and remembrance, the stories people told, the character that outlived the man. This teaches us something about how virtue transmits across generations. Sometimes we learn from presence, sometimes from absence, sometimes from the echo someone leaves behind. And his mother, Domitia Lucilla, she gave him not just abstinence from evil deeds, but from evil thoughts. This is a high standard. It's not enough to behave well. The inner life must be cultivated too. She also taught him simplicity, living far removed from the habits of the rich. Remember, Marcus grew up in extraordinary wealth. His mother taught him not to be defined by it. He continues with his great-grandfather.
From my great-grandfather, not to have frequented public schools, and to have had good teachers at home, and to know that on such things a man should spend liberally.
This is practical wisdom about education. The public schools of Rome were often chaotic. Marcus learned that quality instruction is worth paying for. Spend liberally on what matters. It's permission to invest in one's formation without guilt or hesitation. Early teachers, the shapers. Now Marcus turns to his teachers, and here the entries become more detailed, more revealing.
From Diognetus, not to busy myself about trifling things, and not to give credit to what was said by miracle workers and jugglers about incantations and the driving away of demons and such things, and not to breed quails for fighting, nor to give myself up passionately to such things, and to endure freedom of speech, and to have become intimate with philosophy.
Diognetus was one of Marcus's painting teachers, but notice what he actually taught. Critical thinking, skepticism towards charlatans, not wasting energy on trivial pursuits, and something remarkable, enduring freedom of speech. This means learning to hear criticism, to tolerate disagreement, to not surround yourself with flatterers. For an emperor, this is crucial. Everyone around you wants to please you. Diognetus taught Marcus, even as a boy, to value truth over comfort. And then that final phrase, to have become intimate with philosophy. Diognetus opened the door. Philosophy wasn't just a subject. It became a relationship.
From Rusticus, I received the impression that my character required improvement and discipline, and from him I learned not to be led astray to sophistic emulation, nor to writing on speculative matters, nor to delivering little hortatory orations, nor to showing myself off as a man who practices much discipline, or does benevolent acts in order to make a display.
Junius Rusticus was perhaps the most important philosophical influence on Marcus's life. He was a Stoic teacher who became consul twice and remained close to Marcus throughout his reign. Look at what Rusticus taught. First, that Marcus's character required improvement and discipline. This is the opposite of flattery. Rusticus saw the young man clearly, flaws and all, and said so. That honesty was itself a gift. Then the warnings. Don't be a sophist who argues for display. Don't write speculative philosophy that sounds impressive but changes nothing. Don't give little speeches about virtue. Don't perform discipline or benevolence for an audience. In other words, be real. Do the work. Skip the performance. The entry continues.
And to read carefully, and not to be satisfied with a superficial understanding of a book, nor hastily to give my assent to those who talk overmuch. And I am indebted to him for being acquainted with the discourses of Epictetus, which he communicated to me out of his own collection.
Read carefully. Don't skim. Don't nod along with impressive talkers. And then the crucial gift, Rusticus gave Marcus access to the teachings of Epictetus. Epictetus was a former slave who became one of the greatest Stoic teachers. His discourses, recorded by his student Arrian, would become central to Marcus's philosophical practice. We'll encounter Epictetus's influence throughout the Meditations. That influence began here, with Rusticus sharing his personal collection. Think about the chain of transmission this represents. Epictetus was enslaved, he was freed, and began teaching philosophy. His student Arrian wrote down his teachings. Somehow those writings came into Rusticus's possession. Rusticus, a Roman senator, shared them with Marcus, a future emperor. The wisdom of a former slave, transmitted through a senator, shaping the mind that would rule the known world. This is how philosophy actually works, not through abstract ideas floating in the ether, but through specific people handing specific texts to specific other people. Rusticus could have kept Epictetus to himself. The discourses were not widely published in Marcus's time. They existed in private copies, passed among serious practitioners. Rusticus chose to share his copy. That choice shaped history. Marcus acknowledges this. He doesn't just thank Rusticus for the philosophical training, he specifically mentions the discourses, recognizing that without Rusticus's generosity, he might never have encountered the teaching that would become central to his life. Philosophical teachers, the refiners.
From Apollonius, I learned freedom of will and undeviating steadiness of purpose, and to look to nothing else, not even for a moment, except to reason.
Apollonius of Chalcedon was a Stoic philosopher who reportedly refused to come to the imperial palace to teach. If Marcus wanted instruction, he had to go to Apollonius. This itself was a lesson. Philosophy doesn't bow to power. What did he teach? Freedom of will and undeviating steadiness of purpose, the ability to choose and to maintain that choice against all pressure, and to look to nothing except reason, not emotion, not convenience, not fear, reason alone. The entry continues with more.
And to be the same in all circumstances, in violent pains, on the loss of a child, in long illness, and to see clearly in a living example that the same man can be both most resolute and yielding, and not peevish in giving his instruction, and to have had before my eyes a man who clearly considered his experience and his skill in expounding philosophical principles as the smallest of his good qualities.
This is extraordinary. Marcus lists violent pain, losing a child, long illness, and in all these Apollonius remained the same. Equanimity under extreme pressure. Not Stoic suppression, but genuine steadiness. And then paradox, most resolute and yielding. Strong in principle, but flexible in approach. Not rigidly doctrinaire, not peevish when teaching. Apollonius embodied the Stoic ideal without making a display of it. His skill in philosophy was the smallest of his good qualities. Character exceeded cleverness.
From Sextus, a benevolent disposition, and the example of a family governed in a fatherly manner, and the idea of living conformably to nature, and gravity without affectation, and to look carefully after the interests of friends, and to tolerate ignorant persons, and those who form opinions without consideration.
Sextus of Chaeronea was a grandson of Plutarch, the famous biographer. From him, Marcus learned benevolence, natural living, and authentic gravity. Note the phrase gravity without affectation. Seriousness that isn't performed, weight that isn't pretentious. And this, to tolerate ignorant persons, not to be irritated by those who haven't thought things through. This is practical wisdom for anyone who has to deal with people, which is everyone. The entry on Sextus continues beautifully.
And his ability to adapt himself to all men was such that his conversation was more agreeable than any flattery, and his presence commanded the highest respect from all who were near him at the time, and the happy and skillful discovery and arrangement of the principles necessary for life, and he never showed anger or any other passion, but was entirely free from passion, and yet was full of affection.
Here's the Stoic ideal made flesh. Conversation more agreeable than flattery, respect commanded without demanding it, complete freedom from destructive passion, and yet full of affection. That final phrase requires attention. The Stoics distinguished sharply between pathe, the disturbing passions they sought to eliminate, and what later Stoics called eupatheiai, the good emotions that remain when pathei are removed. The pathe include things like irrational fear, excessive desire, uncontrolled anger, corrosive envy. These disturb the soul and prevent clear judgment. But eliminating pathe doesn't mean becoming a stone. What remains are the eupatheiai: reasonable joy, appropriate caution, rational wish for good things, and yes, affection. Love that doesn't depend on attachment to outcomes, care that doesn't become possessive, warmth that doesn't compromise wisdom. Gregory Hayes, in his contemporary translation, renders this balance beautifully.
Indifferent to superficial honors, hard work, persistence, ready to listen to anyone who could contribute to the public good, unerring instinct for the right time and tone.
Wait, that's from a different entry. But Hayes captures the same quality throughout: intensity without anxiety, caring without clutching. This is what Sextus modeled and what Marcus aspired to embody. The Stoic reputation for coldness, for emotional suppression, for robotic indifference, misses this crucial distinction. Sextus was entirely free from passion and yet was full of affection. The goal isn't to feel nothing. The goal is to feel appropriately without the distortions that make emotions harmful to ourselves and others. Marcus continues, describing the rhetorical training he received from Fronto.
From Alexander the grammarian, to refrain from fault-finding, and not in a reproachful way, to chide those who uttered any barbarous or solecistic or strange-sounding expression, but dexterously to introduce the very expression which ought to have been used, and in the way of answer, or giving confirmation, or joining in an inquiry about the thing itself, not about the word, or by some other fit suggestion.
Even in grammar instruction, Marcus found moral teaching. Don't embarrass people for their linguistic errors. Don't correct them reproachfully. Instead, model the correct usage naturally, weaving it into conversation so they learn without humiliation. This is teaching that serves the student rather than displaying the teacher's superiority. Alexander the grammarian showed Marcus that how you correct matters as much as what you correct. His teacher Fronto, the most famous orator of the age, taught something complementary.
From Fronto, I learned to observe what envy and duplicity and hypocrisy are in a tyrant, and that generally those among us who are called patricians are rather deficient in parental affection.
This is remarkable. Fronto was Marcus's rhetoric teacher, but the lesson here isn't about persuasion or eloquence. It's about moral insight through literature. Fronto apparently used the study of speeches and texts to illuminate human nature. Through examining tyrants in history and literature, Marcus learned to recognize envy, duplicity, and hypocrisy. These aren't just abstract categories. They're patterns to be identified in real people, including people in power. And then that startling observation: those among us who are called patricians are rather deficient in parental affection. Marcus, himself a patrician of the highest rank, learned to see his own class clearly. The aristocracy failed at something basic. Their wealth and status didn't translate to warmth with their children. This is the capacity to accept criticism of one's own group, to see the limitations of your own class, your own culture, your own inherited position. Fronto gave Marcus the tools to read his own world critically, to recognize that privilege and virtue don't necessarily correlate.
From Alexander the Platonic, not frequently, nor without necessity, to say to anyone, or to write in a letter, that I have no leisure, nor continually to excuse the neglect of duties required by our relation to those with whom we live, by alleging urgent occupations.
This is pointed. Don't constantly say you're too busy. Don't excuse neglecting relationships by citing important work. Alexander the Platonist taught Marcus that busyness is often an excuse. Our relationships require attention. Claiming we have no leisure can become a way of avoiding what matters. Maxwell Staniforth's translation sharpens the accusation.
From Alexander the Platonist, not to be constantly telling people or writing to them that I am too busy unless I really am, and not to be forever excusing my neglect of the duties our mutual relations demand by pleading the pressure of circumstances.
Notice, unless I really am. Alexander wasn't saying never claim busyness. He was saying don't use it as a default excuse, a shield against connection. The busy person who always has time for what truly matters reveals their priorities. The busy person who never has time reveals different priorities. For an emperor with genuine demands on his time, this counsel must have cut deep. The busiest person in the empire was being warned not to hide behind his busyness. Important people use importance as an emotional barrier. Alexander taught Marcus to notice when he was doing exactly that. The culmination, what Maximus taught. Now we reach one of the longest and most detailed entries, what Marcus learned from Maximus.
From Maximus, I learned self-government, and not to be led aside by anything, and cheerfulness in all circumstances, as well as in illness, and a just admixture in the moral character of sweetness and dignity, and to do what was set before me without complaining.
Claudius Maximus was a Stoic philosopher and consul. Marcus lists his qualities systematically: self-government, steadfastness, cheerfulness even in illness, sweetness balanced with dignity, and doing duty without complaint. Each quality builds on the last. Self-government enables steadfastness. Steadfastness enables cheerfulness under pressure. And all of it manifests as getting things done without whining about it.
I observed that everybody believed that he thought as he spoke, and that in all that he did, he never had any bad intention, and he never showed amazement and surprise, and was never in a hurry, and never put off doing a thing, nor was perplexed, nor dejected, nor did he ever laugh to disguise his vexation, nor, on the other hand, was he ever passionate or suspicious.
Look at this catalogue. Never showed amazement, never hurried, never procrastinated, never perplexed or dejected, never used laughter as a mask, never passionate or suspicious. This is almost inhuman steadiness. But Marcus saw it in Maximus, a living proof that such equanimity was possible.
He was accustomed to do acts of beneficence, and was ready to forgive, and was free from all falsehood, and he presented the appearance of a man who could not be diverted from right, rather than of a man who had been improved. I observed, too, that no man could ever think that he was despised by Maximus, or ever venture to think himself a better man.
That final observation is remarkable. No man could ever think that he was despised by Maximus. Everyone felt respected, and yet no one dared think themselves superior. This is authority without arrogance, presence without pretension. Maximus appeared not as someone who had been improved, who had worked on himself and gotten better, but as someone who simply could not be diverted from right, as if virtue was his nature, not his achievement. But the portrait isn't complete without one more quality that Marcus mentions.
He had also the art of being humorous in an agreeable way.
One line easily overlooked, but it completes the picture. Maximus wasn't grim. His equanimity included the capacity for appropriate humor. He could be agreeable, even witty, without compromising his seriousness. This is crucial for understanding what Stoic tranquility actually looks like. It's not a permanent frown. It's not humorless intensity. Maximus could laugh genuinely, not as a mask for vexation, but from actual good humor. The absence of disturbing passion doesn't mean the absence of joy. Marcus also notes that Maximus was ready to accept favors from friends without either becoming beholden to them or ignoring them. This is its own art. Some people can't receive graciously. They either feel crushing obligation or dismiss the gift entirely. Maximus could receive with simple appreciation, neither grasping nor deflecting. Catullus, the art of friendship and true love. We come now to Catullus, a figure about whom history tells us frustratingly little. The name appears in Roman records, but we cannot identify with certainty which Catullus Marcus means. What we have is what Marcus tells us, and what he tells us is worth careful attention.
From Catullus, not to be indifferent when a friend finds fault, even if he should find fault without reason, but to try to restore him to his usual disposition, and to be ready to speak well of teachers, as it is reported of Domitius and Athenodotus, and to love my children truly.
3 distinct lessons from one teacher. Let's take them in order. The first is about receiving criticism. Notice the precision here. Marcus doesn't say we should accept all criticism as valid. He says we shouldn't be indifferent when a friend finds fault, even if he should find fault without reason. The criticism might be wrong, the friend might be mistaken, even unfair. That doesn't matter. What matters is the relationship. The Stoic response to unjust criticism isn't defensiveness. It isn't counterattack. It isn't even patient explanation of why the friend is wrong. It's restoration. To try to restore him to his usual disposition. The goal isn't winning the argument. The goal is returning the friendship to its proper state. This is remarkably mature. Most of us, when criticized unfairly, focus on the unfairness. We want acknowledgement that we were right. Marcus learned from Catullus to focus elsewhere entirely. The friend's error is less important than the friend's well-being.
And to be ready to speak well of teachers, as it is reported of Domitius and Athenodotus.
Here Marcus cites examples. Domitius and Athenodotus were apparently known for praising their teachers. This might seem like simple courtesy, but Marcus includes it for a reason. Speaking well of teachers is an act of intellectual honesty. It acknowledges that we didn't arrive at our understanding alone. It counters the temptation to present ourselves as self-made, as original thinkers who owe nothing to anyone. Every time we cite a source, credit an influence, or acknowledge a debt, we participate in the chain of transmission that keeps wisdom alive. The alternative is intellectual theft, taking what teachers gave us and presenting it as our own discovery. Marcus read this tendency clearly and learned from Catullus to resist it.
And to love my children truly.
The shortest phrase, the deepest lesson. Marcus had at least 13 children. Most died young. Only one son, Commodus, survived to adulthood, and he would become one of Rome's most disastrous emperors. The phrase, to love my children truly, carries weight we can only imagine. What does it mean to love truly? The Stoics distinguish between natural affection, which is instinctive, and rational love, which involves seeing clearly. True love for children would mean wanting what is genuinely good for them, not what gratifies us as parents. It would mean preparing them for reality, not shielding them from it. It would mean loving them as they are, not as projections of our own ambitions. From Catullus, Marcus learned that love requires truth. Sentiment isn't enough. Affection isn't enough. We must love truly, which means loving in accordance with what is real. Severus, Political Philosophy and Personal Virtue. Severus presents us with another figure difficult to identify precisely. He may have been Claudius Severus Arabianus, a peripatetic philosopher who later became Marcus's son-in-law. What matters is what Marcus learned, and here we find one of the most detailed entries in Book 1.
From Severus, to love my kin, and to love truth, and to love justice. And through him I learned to know Thrasea, Helvidius, Cato, Dion, Brutus.
The entry begins with 3 objects of love, kin, truth, justice, then immediately pivots to names, Thrasea, Helvidius, Cato, Dion, Brutus. Who were these men, and why does Marcus list them together? They were all martyrs to principle. Thrasea Paetus was a Roman senator executed by Nero for his Stoic opposition to tyranny. Helvidius Priscus, Thrasea's son-in-law, was executed by Vespasian for similar reasons. Cato the Younger chose suicide rather than submit to Caesar. Dion of Syracuse fought against the tyrant Dionysius. Brutus participated in Caesar's assassination in the name of the Republic. These men shared one quality. They valued principle above survival. They chose death rather than compromise with what they believed was wrong. Through Severus, Marcus learned to admire this. The most powerful man in the world was taught to revere those who defied power when power became unjust. This is remarkable. And it continues.
And from him I received the idea of a polity in which there is the same law for all, a polity administered with regard to equal rights and equal freedom of speech, and the idea of a kingly government which respects most of all the freedom of the governed.
Here is political philosophy. Marcus articulates an ideal: equal law for all citizens, equal rights, equal freedom of speech. And then he says something striking about kingship itself. The best king is one who respects most of all the freedom of the governed. This from an absolute monarch, an emperor with power of life and death over millions. Marcus learned from Severus that legitimate authority exists to serve freedom, not to suppress it. The ruler who respects the freedom of subjects governs better than the ruler who demands submission. Modern political philosophy often traces concepts of equal rights and constitutional government to Enlightenment thinkers. But here, in the 2nd century, a Roman emperor articulates these principles as ideals he learned from a teacher. The ideas are ancient. Their implementation has been the work of millennia.
And from him also I learned steadiness in my regard for philosophy, and a disposition to do good, and to give to others readily, and to cherish good hopes, and to believe that I am loved by my friends.
Now the entry shifts from political philosophy to personal disposition. Steadiness in regard for philosophy means consistency. Not enthusiasm that flares and fades, but sustained commitment over time. This quality appears throughout Book 1. Marcus valued persistence above brilliance. A disposition to do good is simpler than it sounds. Most people want to do good occasionally, when convenient, when they feel like it. A disposition means an inclination that operates without deliberation. The good act becomes automatic, natural, unreflective. This requires long cultivation. To cherish good hopes and to believe that I am loved by my friends. For a Stoic, hope is dangerous. It attaches us to outcomes we cannot control. Yet Marcus learned from Severus to maintain good hopes anyway, not naive optimism, but reasoned confidence that things can work out well. And to believe one is loved, this is vulnerability. It requires trusting others, accepting that we cannot verify their inner states, choosing to believe in their affection rather than doubting it. Marcus the Emperor, surrounded by flatterers and conspirators, learned to believe he was genuinely loved. This takes courage.
And in him I observed that he did not conceal his censure of those who deserved it, and that his friends had no need to conjecture what he wished or did not wish, but it was quite plain.
Transparency. Severus didn't hide his judgments. When someone deserved criticism, he provided it openly. His friends never had to guess what he wanted because he told them directly. This is harder than it sounds. Most of us soften our criticism, obscure our preferences, leave others to infer what we really think. We call this politeness. Marcus learned from Severus to call it something else, opacity. The truly good person is clear. Their yes means yes. Their no means no. Those who know them don't have to interpret signals or decode hints. For an emperor, this quality would be revolutionary. Imperial courts ran on indirection. Courtiers devoted their lives to interpreting the emperor's mood, guessing his preferences, anticipating his desires. A transparent emperor would upend this entire system. Whether Marcus achieved this transparency in practice, we cannot know. But he learned from Severus that it was the ideal. Antoninus Pius, the model emperor. We arrive now at the longest entry in Book 1, the most detailed portrait, the figure who shaped Marcus more than any other. Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, his predecessor as emperor, and by all accounts one of the most successful rulers Rome ever produced. Antoninus reigned for 23 years, from 138 to 161 CE. His rule was so peaceful, so prosperous, so free of crisis that historians struggle to narrate it. There were no major wars, no catastrophic plagues, no civil conflicts. The empire simply functioned, administered by a man who approached his duties with quiet competence. Marcus lived in Antoninus's household from the age of 17, when Hadrian arranged the adoption that would eventually make Marcus emperor. For over 2 decades, Marcus observed Antoninus daily. What he saw became the template for his own rule. What he recorded in Book 1 is the most complete portrait we have of what ancient Romans meant by a good emperor.
From my father, I learned mildness and an unchangeable resolution in things that had been judged after full investigation. No vanity about so-called honors, a love of labor and perseverance.
4 qualities in the first sentence, let's examine each. Mildness. The Greek word is priotes, often translated as gentleness or meekness. It doesn't mean weakness, it means the absence of harshness when harshness isn't necessary. The mild ruler can be severe when severity is required, but defaults to gentleness rather than force. Unchangeable resolution in things judged after full investigation. This is the complement to mildness. Once Antoninus had thoroughly examined a matter and reached a conclusion, he held to it. He wasn't swayed by pressure, flattery, or new arguments that were merely old arguments in different dress. The investigation was thorough, the decision was final. No vanity about so-called honors. Antoninus apparently treated the trappings of imperial power as what they were, trappings, the titles, the ceremonies, the elaborate protocols of court life. He participated in them because they served functions, but he didn't confuse them with genuine worth. A love of labor and perseverance. The emperor worked. Not reluctantly, not minimally, but with actual love for the work itself. And he persisted. Day after day, year after year, the same duties performed with the same attention.
A readiness to hear those who had anything to propose for the common good, and an inflexible determination to give to every man according to his desert.
2 more qualities, both political. First, openness to proposals. Antoninus listened. When someone had an idea that might benefit the Commonwealth, they could bring it to the emperor and receive a fair hearing. This sounds obvious, but power tends toward closure. The longer someone holds authority, the less they want to hear suggestions that imply their current approach is inadequate. Antoninus resisted this tendency. Second, justice. An inflexible determination to give to every man according to his desert. Desert means what someone deserves. Antoninus was committed to proportionality. Rewards matched contributions. Punishments matched offenses. No favoritism. No arbitrary mercy that undermined fairness. No arbitrary severity that exceeded what wrongdoing warranted. The combination is significant. Openness to input combined with firmness in judgment. Listen to everyone, then decide justly. Don't let the listening become indecision. Don't let the firmness become closed-mindedness.
A knowledge of when it was necessary to pursue a matter strenuously, and when to relax, and the ending of love affairs with boys.
Practical wisdom about intensity. Some matters require sustained effort. Others benefit from a lighter touch. Knowing which is which cannot be taught through rules. It requires judgment developed through experience. Then a surprising note. The ending of love affairs with boys. Roman sexual customs permitted relationships between adult men and adolescent males under certain conditions. That Antoninus ended this practice in his own life, and that Marcus notes it approvingly tells us something about the moral seriousness of this household. Not everything permitted was embraced. Some customs were examined and found wanting.
A disposition to give way to those who were possessed of any particular faculty, as to those who were eloquent, or those who were skilled in history, or law, or customs, and a willingness to help those who were deserving, whether it were fame or office or any other thing that they wanted, in all things behaving according to ancestral customs, though not making any show of following them.
Here's institutional wisdom. Antoninus deferred to expertise. When someone knew more about a subject than he did, he gave way. Eloquent speakers, historians, lawyers, each had knowledge the emperor lacked. A lesser ruler might resent this, might insist on his own judgment to preserve the appearance of authority. Antoninus didn't need to seem all-knowing. He could use what others knew. Martin Hammond's translation brings out another dimension.
Ready to yield without jealousy to those with some special ability, eloquence, say, or law, or custom, or any other such expertise, and to give them his active support, so that each might win the recognition appropriate to his particular excellence.
Active support. Not just stepping aside, but actively promoting those with expertise, helping them win recognition. This is secure leadership. The insecure leader surrounds himself with mediocrities. The secure leader elevates the excellent, and notice the mundane endurances Marcus catalogues.
His ability to bear unflinchingly the criticism of his projects, his constancy in friendships, his stamina to remain awake when duty required, his ability to sit through tedious proceedings and stay alert during boring speeches.
Sitting through tedious proceedings, staying awake during boring speeches. These aren't heroic. They're just necessary. The emperor attended endless meetings, ceremonies, audiences. Most were dull. Antoninus remained present anyway. The glamour of power isn't glamorous. It's stamina applied to monotony. And when Antoninus died, Marcus notes, he went without distress and without dissemblance. He faced his death as he had faced everything else, calmly, honestly, without drama. The pattern held to the end. The entry on Antoninus continues at length. Let us hear several more portions.
It was his practice to think out everything well beforehand, and to settle it quietly, methodically, vigorously, consistently, and without confusion.
5 adverbs describing imperial action. Quietly, methodically, vigorously, consistently, without confusion. Consider the opposite of each. Loudly, haphazardly, weakly, inconsistently, confusedly. This describes most exercises of power we observe, ancient or modern. Antoninus embodied the reverse. He thought before he acted. He followed plans. He worked steadily. He maintained energy. He stayed consistent. He remained clear. This is not charisma. It's competence. The unglamorous excellence of someone who simply does their job day after day without drama.
And one might apply to him what is recorded of Socrates, that he was able to abstain from and to enjoy those things which most people find it hard to abstain from and too easy to enjoy, while to be strong enough to endure the one and sober enough to refrain from the other, is characteristic of a man with a perfect and unconquerable soul.
Marcus now compares Antoninus to Socrates, the highest comparison available in ancient philosophy. The Socratic quality Marcus identifies is mastery over pleasure. Most people cannot abstain from pleasures when they're available. Most people cannot enjoy pleasures moderately when they indulge. Antoninus could do both. He could refrain when refraining was appropriate. He could enjoy when enjoyment was appropriate. Neither indulgence nor abstinence was compulsive. A perfect and unconquerable soul. Unconquerable by what? By appetite, by desire, by the need for pleasure or the fear of its absence. Such a soul is free. It acts from choice, not compulsion. It enjoys without dependency. It abstains without resentment.
It is characteristic of a man ripe and perfect, beyond the reach of flattery, and able to govern both himself and others.
The political implication. Self-governance enables governance of others. The emperor, who cannot rule his own appetites, cannot reliably rule an empire. Flattery cannot reach someone who doesn't need approval. Such a person can make unpopular decisions when unpopular decisions are right.
In him there was also this, that he honored those who were true philosophers, and he did not reproach those who pretended to be philosophers, nor yet was he easily led by them.
A subtle discrimination. Antoninus honored genuine philosophers but didn't attack the pretenders. He simply wasn't deceived by them. This is mature. The impulse to expose frauds, to publicly shame those who claim wisdom they don't possess, is strong in intellectually serious people. Antoninus resisted it. He honored the real thing and ignored the imitation. No energy wasted on denunciation.
He was easy in conversation, and he made himself agreeable without any offensive affectation. He took a reasonable care of his body, not as one who was greatly attached to life, nor out of regard to personal appearance, but so as not to require much medical care through neglect.
Social grace without performance. Antoninus was pleasant company, but his pleasantness was natural, not affected. He cared for his body, but his care was moderate. Not obsessive health consciousness, not vain attention to appearance, but simple maintenance. Enough care to avoid needing doctors. No more. The phrase "not as one who was greatly attached to life" is significant. Stoics trained themselves to hold life lightly. Antoninus apparently achieved this. He cared for his body because a healthy body serves better, not because he feared death.
He was most ready to give way, without envy to those who possessed any particular faculty, and to give them his help, so that each might be honored according to his special excellence. He did all things according to ancestral customs, without affecting to follow them.
Repetition from earlier, but with new emphasis. Most ready to give way without envy. Envy is the poison of power. The ruler who cannot bear others excelling will surround himself with mediocrities. Antoninus felt no envy. He could recognize excellence in others, defer to it, and help it receive appropriate honor.
He was not changeable or capricious, but remained in the same places and with the same pursuits. And after his paroxysms of headache, he came immediately fresh and vigorous to his usual duties.
Again, repetition with emphasis, stability, persistence through physical suffering, return to duty. These qualities mattered enough to Marcus that he states them twice.
And not many things were known to him through others, but very few, and those only such as related to public affairs. Prudent also, and moderate in public entertainments, in buildings, in distributions, and in all such things. A man who looked to what ought to be done, not to the reputation which might follow the doing of these things.
More repetition. The themes accumulate. Transparency, prudence, focus on substance over appearance. Marcus circles these qualities, returning to them, emphasizing them, as if trying to burn them into his own character through repeated contemplation.
He received no honors from those near him or from his people, for he was not fond of receiving them, and he sought no popularity. In all things, temperate and gentle.
The catalogue approaches its end. Antoninus neither demanded honors nor sought popularity. Temperate, gentle. 2 words that summarize a 23-year reign.
Such was his character, that he was never heard to swear, that his way of life was never made the subject of blame or ridicule, that he never played the tyrant, either in the heat of passion or in the cold calculation of fear, that his judgments were mature and final, that he never clutched at things in his eagerness, and that, on every occasion, he watched his own actions with the eye of a critic and examined them as if they had been performed by another.
A final summary. Never swore. Never gave cause for blame or ridicule. Never tyrannical, whether in anger or in fear. Judgments mature and final. No grasping. Constant self-examination. That last quality is the most demanding. He watched his own actions with the eye of a critic and examined them as if they had been performed by another. Imagine applying this standard to yourself. Every action examined as if someone else had done it. No special pleading, no excuses available to the self that wouldn't be available to anyone. This is what Marcus learned from Antoninus. This is the standard against which he measured himself throughout the Meditations. And this is perhaps why the later books contain so much self-criticism. Marcus had seen excellence embodied. He knew what was possible. When he fell short, he knew exactly how far.
I remember, too, his constancy in friendships, his toleration of those who openly opposed his opinions, his pleasure when anyone showed him anything better, and his piety without superstition.
4 final qualities: constancy and friendships. Antoninus didn't abandon friends when they became inconvenient. Toleration of opposition. He didn't require agreement. Those who disagreed openly were not punished. Pleasure when shown something better. He could learn. He could change his mind. He welcomed correction. And piety without superstition. Religious observance grounded in reason, not fear.
Think of all these things, so that when your last hour comes, your conscience may be as clear as his.
Marcus addresses himself directly. The entry ends with an imperative. Think of all these things. Why? So that death can be faced with a clear conscience. This is the purpose of Book 1. Not biography, not nostalgia. Preparation for death. By contemplating those who lived well, we clarify what living well means. By naming our debts, we name our aspirations. By acknowledging what we received, we commit to becoming worthy of the gift. Antoninus died at the age of 74, after a reign of remarkable peace. His final word, according to ancient sources, was equanimity, the password he gave to the guards on his last night, the summary of his approach to everything. Marcus would not achieve his adoptive father's peace. Wars, plagues, and betrayals awaited him, but he had seen what was possible. He had lived alongside it for over 20 years, and he wrote it down in 17 entries so that in the chaos to come he might remember. The gods, the ultimate debt. Marcus closes Book 1 not with a human teacher but with the gods, and this final entry is the longest of all.
To the gods, I am indebted for having good grandfathers, good parents, a good sister, good teachers, good associates, good kinsmen and friends, nearly everything good. Further, I owe it to the gods that I was not hurried into any offense against any of them, though I had a disposition which, if opportunity had offered, might have led me to do something of this kind. But through their favor, there never was such a concurrence of circumstances as put me to the trial.
This is radical humility. Marcus attributes everything good to the gods, his family, his teachers, his friends, all of it gift. And then this confession. He had a disposition that might have led him to offend against them. Given the right circumstances, Marcus could have failed. He acknowledges the darkness in himself. But circumstances never conspired to test him in that particular way. That too was divine favor.
Further, I am thankful to the gods that I was not longer brought up with my grandfather's concubine, and that I preserved the flower of my youth, and that I did not make proof of my virility before the proper season, but even deferred the time, that I was subjected to a ruler and a father who was able to take away all pride from me, and to bring me to the knowledge that it is possible for a man to live in a palace without wanting either guards or embroidered dresses, or torches and statues, and such like show.
Marcus thanks the gods for specific escapes, not raised by his grandfather's concubine, preserved sexually until the proper time. And then this, subjected to Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father and predecessor as emperor, who taught him that palace life doesn't require ostentation. You can be emperor without guards, embroidered dresses, torches, and statues. You can hold absolute power simply.
But that it is in such a man's power to reduce himself almost to the fashion of a private person, without being for this reason either meaner in thought or more remiss in action, with respect to the things which must be done for the public interest in a manner that befits a ruler.
This is the lesson of Antoninus. You can live simply without becoming small-minded or lazy about public duty. Simplicity is not retreat from responsibility. It's freedom to fulfill responsibility without distraction.
I thank the gods for giving me such a brother, who was able by his moral character to rouse me to vigilance over myself, and who, at the same time, pleased me by his respect and affection, that my children have not been stupid nor deformed in body, that I did not make more proficiency in rhetoric, poetry, and the other studies, in which I should perhaps have been completely engaged, if I had seen that I was making progress in them.
His brother Lucius Verus was co-emperor with Marcus, and Marcus is thankful for children who were neither stupid nor deformed. This might sound cold to modern ears, but remember the context. Infant mortality was high. Many children died or were born with conditions that limited their lives. Marcus is genuinely grateful for healthy children. And then a fascinating admission. He's grateful he didn't excel at rhetoric and poetry because that would have consumed him. His lack of literary talent preserved him for philosophy. Sometimes our limitations are gifts.
I thank the gods that I made haste to advance my teachers to the honors which they seemed to desire, and that I did not put them off with hope of my doing it some time after, since they were then young. I am thankful that I knew Apollonius, Rusticus, Maximus.
He honored his teachers while they lived. He didn't defer recognition. This is simple but important wisdom. Gratitude expressed too late is gratitude wasted. And then the names again: Apollonius, Rusticus, Maximus. The central figures of his philosophical formation acknowledged one more time. The entry continues with more acknowledgments, including this striking passage.
That I received clear and frequent impressions about living according to nature, and what kind of a life that is, so that, so far as depended on the gods and their gifts and help and inspirations, nothing hindered me from forthwith living according to nature, though I still fall short of it through my own fault, and through not observing the admonitions of the gods, and, I may almost say, their direct instructions.
Even after all his training, all his teachers, all his gifts, Marcus acknowledges he falls short. He fails to observe what the gods have shown him. He doesn't fully live according to nature. This is not false modesty. It's honest self-assessment, and it sets up everything that follows in the Meditations. The later books are Marcus trying to do what Book 1 shows he knows he should do. The gap between knowing and living is the space the entire work inhabits.
That my body has held out so long in such a kind of life, that I never touched either Benedicta or Theodotus, and that, after having fallen into amatory passions, I was cured. And though I was often out of humour with Rusticus, I never did anything of which I had occasion to repent.
Physical endurance, sexual restraint, recovery from passion, and this. Though he was often irritated with Rusticus, his greatest teacher, he never did anything he regretted. Anger arose. Action was withheld. No regrets followed. This is Stoic practice in miniature. The emotion comes. The choice remains.
That, though it was my mother's fate to die young, she spent the last years of her life with me. That, whenever I wished to help any man in his need, I was never told that I had not the means of doing it, and that to myself the same necessity never happened, to receive anything from another.
His mother died, but not before years together. He always had means to help others. He never had to receive charity himself. Each of these Marcus recognizes as fortune, not achievement.
That I have such a wife, so obedient, and so affectionate, and so simple.
His wife Faustina. One line? But notice the qualities. Obedient in the Roman sense of partnership, affectionate and simple. Not pretentious, not demanding. There have been historical rumors about Faustina's fidelity. Marcus never addresses them in the Meditations. Here, he expresses gratitude. Whatever the truth, this is what he chose to write. The entry approaches its close with this.
For all these things require the help of the gods and fortune.
The final line of Book 1. All things, not some things, all things, everything Marcus has, everything he's become, everything he might yet achieve requires help, divine help, fortunate circumstance, forces beyond his control. This is the completed arc of Book 1. From grandfather to gods, from specific human influences to the acknowledgement that even those influences were given, not earned. What does Book 1 mean within the broader Stoic tradition? How does it connect to ideas we find elsewhere in ancient philosophy? And what does it tell us about the perennial question of how we become who we are? This isn't the shallow gratitude of count your blessings. It's philosophical gratitude, systematic acknowledgement of all the streams that flow into who you are, and it raises profound questions about the nature of the self, the transmission of virtue, and what it actually means to become a good person. The Stoic self. Relational, not isolated. The Stoics had a concept that helps us understand what Marcus is doing here, oikeiosis. The word means something like appropriation or familiarization. It describes the process by which we expand our sense of self to include others. Family first, then friends, then community, then ultimately all rational beings. The Stoic philosopher Heracles described this as a series of concentric circles. You stand at the center. The innermost circle contains your body and mind. The next circle holds your immediate family, then extended family, then neighbors, then fellow citizens, then all humanity. The goal of Stoic practice, Heracles taught, was to draw these circles inward, to treat strangers with the concern you'd show neighbors, to treat neighbors with the love you'd show family, to expand your identification until nothing rational is alien to you. Book 1 performs oikeiosis in reverse. Instead of expanding outward, Marcus traces inward. All these others are already inside him. Their virtues, their lessons, their examples. He is constituted by relationship. The self he's trying to improve isn't a solitary entity but a nexus of transmitted influences. This connects to the broader Stoic understanding of identity. Epictetus, whose teachings Rusticus gave Marcus, put it directly.
You are a citizen of the world and a part of it, not a subordinate part, but a principal part. You are capable of comprehending the divine administration and of considering the connection of things.
A principal part, not subordinate. Connected to everything else. Your rationality is a fragment of universal reason. Your existence is woven into the whole. Before Marcus can tell himself what to do, he must acknowledge what he already is, and what he is includes everyone who formed him. Cross-cultural parallels, East and West. Marcus wrote in the Roman tradition drawing on Greek philosophy, but the insight at the heart of Book 1 appears across cultures, suggesting something perennial rather than merely local. In Confucian thought, the emphasis on relationships, on filial piety, on proper acknowledgement of teachers and ancestors runs even deeper. Confucius taught that virtue is not self-generated but transmitted through lineage. The Analects record him saying,
When your father is alive, observe his intentions. When he is deceased, model yourself on the memory of his behavior. If in 3 years after his death you have not deviated from your father's ways, then you may be called a dutiful son.
3 years of maintaining what was received before making it your own. The Confucian disciple doesn't start fresh. He inherits a tradition, embodies it, and only then might modify it. Marcus would have understood this immediately. His gratitude to Antoninus Pius, His adoptive father and predecessor as emperor extends to modeling specific behaviors, the simplicity, the freedom from ostentation, the ability to reduce himself to a private person without becoming mean in thought. In Buddhist psychology, we find a different but complementary insight, the recognition that the self is not solid but constructed. That identity is process, not substance, that what seems like me is actually countless causes and conditions flowing together. The Buddhist term is pratityasamutpada, often translated as dependent origination. Nothing exists independently. Everything arises in relation to everything else. The Buddha taught,
When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases.
Book 1 is Marcus's acknowledgment of dependent origination. His virtues arose because other people's virtues arose. His self-government exists because his grandfather modeled self-government. His philosophical practice exists because Rusticus handed him Epictetus. Remove any link in the chain, and the Marcus who writes the Meditations wouldn't exist. This isn't just intellectual humility, it's metaphysical accuracy. We are not self-creating. We are, in a very real sense, assembled. The South African philosophy of Ubuntu expresses something similar from yet another tradition.
Umuntu ngabantu.
A person is a person through other people. The phrase captures what Marcus demonstrates. Identity is relational. You become yourself through your connections with others. Isolation doesn't reveal the self. It impoverishes it. The medieval European tradition developed this insight through the concept of the great chain of being, where each creature occupies a place in a cosmic hierarchy and derives its existence from what stands above it. For the Christian philosophers, this meant ultimately deriving existence from God. But it also meant recognizing that we exist within a web of dependencies, responsibilities, and relationships. Modern virtue ethics, revived in the 20th century by philosophers like Alasdair MacIntyre and Martha Nussbaum, draws on exactly this Aristotelian Stoic synthesis. MacIntyre's After Virtue argues that we can only understand ourselves as bearers of a tradition. We inherit a role, a set of practices, a community of interpretation. Individual virtue is always situated virtue. MacIntyre writes that we are all characters in narratives we didn't author. We enter a story already in progress and will leave before it concludes. The virtues we might develop depend on where we find ourselves in that story and what roles are available to us. Book 1 is Marcus claiming his place in the narrative. He names the characters who shaped him, acknowledges the plot he inherited, and prepares to play his role as well as he can. The self that will struggle through books 2 through 12 isn't an isolated individual. It's a node in a vast network of transmission, receiving from the past and, whether it knows it or not, transmitting to the future. Nussbaum, working more directly with the Stoics, emphasizes the practical, therapeutic dimension. Philosophy isn't abstract theory, it's medicine for the soul. The goal isn't to know the good, but to live it. Book 1 fits both frameworks. Marcus situates himself in tradition. He names his inheritance, he acknowledges the community that formed him, and he does this as a therapeutic act. Writing it down, making it explicit, is itself part of the medicine. But Marcus isn't simply noting his debts. He's doing something with the noting. Gratitude, in Book 1, functions as a philosophical practice with specific effects. First, it counters the illusion of self-sufficiency. The Roman aristocrat, especially the emperor, faced constant temptation toward arrogance. Everyone defers to you. Everyone flatters you. It becomes easy to believe you deserve your position, that your qualities are your own achievements. Book 1 systematically dismantles this illusion. Every quality Marcus values in himself came from someone else: his temper, his grandfather, his simplicity, his mother, his philosophy, Rusticus, and Apollonius. Strip away the gifts, and what remains? Seneca, writing a generation before Marcus, addressed this directly.
We are born into a kingdom. To obey God is freedom.
And elsewhere.
You must live for another if you would live for yourself.
Seneca understood that the Stoic path requires recognizing our embeddedness. We don't choose our starting conditions. We don't create our capacities from nothing. We receive, and then we work with what we've received. Second, gratitude functions as motivation. Having acknowledged what others gave him, Marcus is now obligated, not in a burdensome way, but in an energizing way. Rusticus corrected him. Apollonius showed him what equanimity looked like. Maximus demonstrated that a man could be most resolute and yielding at once. These weren't just gifts, they were examples, standards, possibilities made visible. Marcus now knows what's achievable because he saw it achieved. His gratitude carries implicit commitment. I will try to become what they showed me was possible. Third, gratitude creates a framework for the rest of the meditations. Books 2 through 12 are Marcus wrestling with himself, often harshly. He criticizes his tendencies toward anger, distraction, and complaint. He pushes himself toward acceptance, discipline, and service. But this self-criticism happens within a context established by Book 1. Marcus isn't trying to become something invented. He's trying to become what he already glimpsed in his teachers. The later books make sense as attempts to embody what he already knows is possible. The responsibility of reception, from student to transmitter. Book 1 raises a question Marcus doesn't directly address, but which runs beneath the surface of everything he writes. What obligations come with receiving? If virtue is transmitted, if we are formed by others, what do we owe in return? The obvious answer is we owe the same transmission to others. We become links in a chain. Rusticus gave Marcus the works of Epictetus. Marcus, in turn, transmitted what he learned through his own practice, his own example, and ultimately through the text we're reading now. The meditations themselves are a kind of payment, a passing on of what was received, but the obligation goes deeper than simple transmission. There's a moral weight to having received. When someone forms you, when they give you capacities you didn't have before, you become responsible for what you do with those capacities. The gift creates accountability. Consider Apollonius, who taught Marcus to remain steady despite fortune's changes. Marcus now has that steadiness, or at least access to it. If he fails to practice it, if he allows himself to be shaken by circumstances despite having the tools to remain stable, he's not just failing himself, he's failing Apollonius. He's wasting what was given. This creates a particular kind of moral psychology. Gratitude, for Marcus, isn't just feeling thankful, it's feeling indebted, and debt demands payment. The payment isn't money or service. It's becoming what you were shown was possible. It's completing the transmission by embodying it. Seneca captures this dynamic in his letters.
Philosophy takes as her aim the state of happiness. Thither she leads us. Thither she opens the way. She shows us what things are evil and what things are seemingly evil. She strips our minds of vain illusion.
Philosophy doesn't just teach, it transforms. And transformation received creates transformation owed. If philosophy has shown you the good, you're now obligated to pursue it. Ignorance might excuse inaction. Knowledge doesn't. This connects to a broader Stoic theme, the difference between knowing and doing. It's possible to know what virtue looks like without being virtuous. It's possible to understand what equanimity means without being equanimous. Book 1 acknowledges that Marcus received models of virtue. The rest of the meditations are his attempts to close the gap between what he's seen and what he's become. The medieval philosophers would later develop this into a distinction between notional and real assent. You can assent to a proposition notionally, intellectually, without it changing how you live. Real assent transforms you. Book 1 is Marcus's catalog of real assents. He didn't just learn about temperance from his grandfather. He was formed by it. The teaching entered his character. This raises the stakes considerably. Education becomes moral obligation. Formation becomes sacred trust. When your teachers give you themselves, when they model virtue in their lives rather than merely describing it in words, you receive something you're bound to honor. Marcus's gratitude isn't sentimental. It's serious. It's a recognition of weight, of responsibility, of the burden that comes with receiving genuine gifts. So, when was Book 1 written? Scholars have long debated the composition of Book 1. It's clearly a unified piece of writing, unlike the fragmented meditations of later books. This distinctiveness has raised questions about when it was written and how it relates to the rest of the work. Some scholars, including Pierre Hadot, suggest that Book 1 was written late in Marcus's life, as a retrospective summary. Having completed the spiritual exercises of Books 2 through 12, Marcus looked back and acknowledged the foundation. This would make Book 1 a kind of capstone, written last but placed first. Others argue that the systematic list-like quality suggests earlier composition. Marcus might have written Book 1 as a young man, establishing his philosophical commitments before the later struggles. The rest of the meditations would then be attempts to live up to this foundation. A third possibility is that Book 1 was a separate exercise entirely, perhaps not originally intended to be part of the same work. Ancient editors may have combined what were distinct texts. The truth is, we don't know. The manuscript tradition doesn't preserve information about composition order. We read Book 1 as it stands, placed first, establishing context for everything that follows. What we can say is that the placement is powerful, whether Marcus intended it or later editors arranged it. Beginning with gratitude shapes how we read the rest. The self-criticism of later books occurs within a frame of received wisdom. The struggles make sense as attempts to honor what was given. Practical application. What would it mean to write your own Book 1? This is not a journaling exercise, it's philosophical practice, and it requires more than listing nice things about nice people. Done properly, it becomes a technology for self-understanding that can reshape how you see yourself and what you owe to your life. Let me offer a structured approach, moving from beginner through intermediate to advanced practice. Beginning. The basic inventory. Start with your formation. Who actually shaped you? Not who should have or who you wish had, but who did. Teachers, parents, friends, enemies perhaps, books, experiences, strangers whose words stuck. Make a list. Don't edit yet. Just write names, faces that come to mind, voices you can still hear, moments that shifted something in you. Most people, when they first attempt this, list between 10 and 30 influences. Some list more. The number doesn't matter. Completeness isn't possible. Honesty is. For each one, be specific. Don't write, "My mother taught me kindness." Write what she actually taught. What specific quality? Through what specific action or example? Marcus doesn't say his grandfather was a good man. He says he learned from him good morals and the government of my temper. Two distinct things: ethical principles and emotional regulation. Specific and separable. Try this format. From person, I learned specific quality or capacity through how they demonstrated or transmitted it. Examples of what this might look like. From my high school chemistry teacher, I learned that frustration with a problem is not a reason to stop working on it. Through watching her spend an entire class period on one student's confusion without ever showing impatience. From my older brother, I learned that strength and gentleness can coexist through how he treated our younger sister when she was ill. From a stranger on a train in 2015, I learned that small kindnesses to strangers matter. Through the simple act of giving up a seat with such natural grace that I thought about it for weeks, the specificity matters. My father taught me integrity is too vague to be useful. My father taught me that you don't lie to people even when lying would be easier. Through the time he told a customer the product wasn't right for them and lost the sale, is a form you can actually work with. Intermediate. The difficult acknowledgments. Once you've listed the obvious positives, go deeper. What did you learn from difficult people? From failures? From those you resisted? Marcus includes teachers who corrected him, who told him his character needed work. These weren't comfortable relationships. They were formative precisely because they weren't comfortable. Your list might include the boss who was unfair, but whose unfairness taught you what justice requires. The friend who betrayed you, but whose betrayal taught you what loyalty means. The parent whose absence taught you presence. The teacher whose criticism stung, but whose standards you eventually absorbed. This isn't about forced positivity. It's about accurate recognition. If someone shaped you even through opposition, even through harm, that shaping is part of who you are. Acknowledging it isn't forgiving it. It's seeing clearly. Advanced. The gap and the transmission. Now consider what you've done with what you received. Marcus writes that he falls short through my own fault and through not observing the admonitions of the gods. He received clear teaching. He didn't fully live it. Where have you fallen short of what you were given? Not as self-flagellation, as clear sight. Transformation requires knowing the gap between potential and actual. The teacher who believed in you. Did you become what they saw? The parent who modeled patience. Are you patient? The mentor who showed you integrity. Do you practice it when no one watches? This part of the practice can be uncomfortable. It should be. The discomfort is signal. It shows where work remains. Write specific instances. Not, I haven't lived up to my father's example, but my father never raised his voice in conflict, and last week I yelled at my partner over something trivial. I have not learned what he showed me. This isn't about guilt. Guilt is self-focused and often unproductive. This is about accuracy, seeing clearly where you stand in relation to what you received. The gap is not shameful. The gap is the space where practice happens. And finally, consider what you might pass on. Marcus wrote Book 1 for himself. But reading it, we receive something. The acknowledgment itself becomes transmittable. What might you write that would transmit what you received? Not to publish, not to share, just to articulate. To complete the circuit from reception to recognition to potential transmission. This is the advanced practice, seeing yourself not just as recipient, but as a link in a chain. What are you passing forward? To children if you have them, to students if you teach, to colleagues, friends, strangers who observe you. Marcus transmitted his grandfather's temper management, his mother's piety, his teacher's philosophical precision. What are you transmitting, whether intentionally or not? Several distortions can corrupt this practice. Watch for them. Forced gratitude. If you have to convince yourself to be grateful for something, the gratitude isn't real. Don't include what you think you should be grateful for. Include what actually shaped you. Honest ambivalence is better than performed appreciation. Hagiography. Marcus doesn't claim his teachers were perfect. He names specific qualities he learned from each. The person who taught you discipline might also have taught you rigidity. Acknowledge complexity. Real people are mixed. The gift and the limitation often come together. Resentment masquerading as acknowledgment. From my father, I learned that promises mean nothing isn't gratitude. It's disguised complaint. There may be legitimate anger in your history. That's for other practices to address. Book 1 is specifically about what you received that made you better, not what harmed you. Comparison and competition. This isn't about having had better or worse formation than others. Some people had extraordinary teachers. Some had terrible circumstances and had to find wisdom in scraps. The practice is about your formation, whatever it was. Comparison distracts from recognition. Incompleteness, anxiety. You won't remember everyone. You'll finish writing and suddenly recall someone crucial you omitted. That's fine. This isn't a legal document. It's an ongoing practice. Add to it over time. Let it evolve. The daily dimension. Beyond the written exercise, Book 1 suggests a daily practice, recognition in the moment. When you respond to difficulty with equanimity, pause afterward. Where did that capacity come from? Who showed you it was possible? That moment of recognition is a small Book 1 entry happening in real time. When you fail, the same question applies. Where did you receive the teaching you just failed to embody? Reconnecting with the source can re-motivate the practice. Marcus wrote his meditations as daily exercises. The later books are fragments, probably composed in spare moments during military campaigns, but they're all attempts to live what Book 1 acknowledges he received. Your own Book 1, once written, becomes a reference point. When you're struggling with patience, you can remember who taught you patience and how. The memory itself is a resource. It reconnects you to the transmission. This is philosophy as practice, not theory. The writing isn't the end. The living is the end. The writing serves the living. Integration. Mind, body, spirit. One final dimension. The practice we're describing is primarily mental. It's reflection, memory, writing. But complete practice integrates all dimensions. As you write your Book 1, notice what happens in your body. Certain memories may produce warmth in your chest. Others may create tension in your shoulders. The body remembers what the mind forgets. These physical signals can guide you toward what matters most, and the spiritual dimension. Marcus ends with the gods. You may or may not share his theology, But the question remains, what do you owe to forces beyond human agency? Luck, timing, circumstances you didn't create, the family you were born into, the era you inhabit, the capacities of your particular body and mind. If you're uncomfortable with theological language, try this. What are you grateful for that no human gave you? The ability to learn, the capacity for joy, the fact of consciousness itself. These two are debts, however you understand their source. Complete practice includes all three. Think about your formation. Feel it in your body. Consider what exceeds human explanation. This is what it means to approach life as Marcus did, not as a purely rational exercise, but as a full human being, drawing on every capacity you possess. Textual analysis, translation, and interpretation. Understanding Book 1 requires grappling with translation, manuscript tradition, and scholarly debate. The text we read in English is several removes from what Marcus actually wrote. Each remove introduces choices that shape meaning. The problem of translation. The opening of Book 1 illustrates why translation matters. The Greek text begins, para tu papu ueru. From my grandfather Verus. So far, so simple. But what follows is more challenging. Marcus says he learned from his grandfather to kalon ethos kai eorgesian. The first term, kalon ethos, means something like noble character or good moral disposition. The second, eorgesian, means something like good character or good moral disposition. Eorgesian is a negative, the absence of orge, which means anger, wrath, or passionate temper. George Long's 19th century translation, which we've been using, renders this as good morals and the government of my temper. He interprets eorgesia not as mere absence of anger, but as active management, government. This implies work, effort, ongoing practice. Gregory Hayes's contemporary translation offers something different.
From my grandfather Verus, decency and a mild temper.
Decency for kalon ethos, mild temper for eorgesian. The effect is more casual, more conversational, but is mild temper the same as government of my temper? A mild temper might be natural, something you're born with. Government implies achievement, discipline. Maxwell Staniforth's Penguin Classics translation offers a third approach.
From my grandfather Verus, I learned good morals and the government of my temper.
Staniforth follows Long closely here, but throughout the text his choices differ subtly from both Long and Hayes. The point isn't that one translation is correct and others wrong. It's that translation involves interpretation. Every English word chosen represents a decision about what Marcus meant. Readers who access the text only in translation are accessing those decisions as much as Marcus's original thoughts. This is why we read multiple translations throughout this series, not to identify the best one, but to triangulate meaning through different interpretive choices. The manuscript tradition. The Meditations survived through a single manuscript line. Unlike texts with multiple independent witnesses, we cannot cross-check variants. What we have is what one scribe or one series of scribes preserved. The oldest surviving manuscript dates to the 14th century, over 1,000 years after Marcus wrote. During that millennium, the text was copied repeatedly, each copying introducing potential errors. Some words may have been misread, some passages may have been corrupted. We cannot be certain we're reading exactly what Marcus wrote. This doesn't mean we should distrust the text. The manuscript tradition is reasonably stable. Major corruptions would likely be obvious, but it does mean we should hold the specific wording lightly. When scholars debate a particular phrase, there may be no way to resolve the debate through textual evidence. For Book 1, the manuscript issues are relatively minor. The text reads coherently and the interpretive challenges are philosophical rather than textual. But when we encounter difficult passages in later books, manuscript uncertainty sometimes becomes relevant. Naming the unnameable. One striking feature of Book 1 is who Marcus doesn't mention. He names teachers, he names friends, he names family, but he doesn't name servants, slaves, nurses, cooks, or the countless others who maintained his daily existence. The Roman aristocratic household was staffed by dozens, sometimes hundreds, of enslaved people. They fed him, clothed him, cleaned for him, and created the conditions in which philosophy was possible. Their absence from Book 1 tells us something about the limits of Marcus's vision. His gratitude extends far, but not infinitely far. The social structure he inhabited rendered certain people invisible to acknowledgment. This isn't a reason to dismiss the text, it's a reason to read it as a product of its time and place. Marcus could see further than most Romans. His Stoicism taught him that enslaved people possess the same rational nature as emperors. But seeing theoretically isn't the same as seeing practically. His Book 1 names those whose contributions he could recognize. Others remained below the threshold of recognition. Modern readers should notice this absence, not to condemn Marcus, but to be aware that our own Book 1 exercises might have similar blind spots. Who contributes to your formation in ways you don't recognize? Whose labor makes your philosophical reflection possible? These are uncomfortable questions, but they're fair questions to ask. Connections and callbacks. Book 1 establishes themes that will recur throughout the meditations. Let me note several connections that will become significant as we continue. Gratitude and grief as companions. Marcus names his teachers. Many were dead by the time he wrote. Domitia Lucilla, his mother, Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, perhaps Rusticus, Apollonius, Maximus as well. There's grief woven through the gratitude. To name what someone gave you is to acknowledge they won't give anymore. The list of debts is also a memorial. Each entry says, "This person is part of me," and often this person is gone. This connection between gratitude and loss runs throughout the meditations. Marcus will return repeatedly to death, to impermanence, to the fact that everything passes. Book 1 establishes why this matters to him. These weren't abstract reflections on mortality. They were responses to actual losses, people he loved, people who formed him, gone. The gratitude preserves them. By naming what he received, Marcus keeps his teachers alive in some sense. They exist in the qualities they transmitted. Rusticus lives in Marcus's philosophical practice. Antoninus lives in Marcus's approach to power. The acknowledgement is preservation against oblivion. And there's another dimension to this memorial. Most of these teachers we would never know existed without Marcus's mention. Apollonius of Chalcedon left no writings that survived. Maximus is barely mentioned in other sources. They exist for us because Marcus remembered them, named them, wrote them down. This is the power and responsibility of acknowledgement. By naming your teachers, you preserve them. By remaining silent, you let them vanish. Marcus chose preservation. 2,000 years later, we know the people who shaped him because he took the time to say so. The theme of self-criticism. Notice how Marcus ends Book 1, acknowledging that he falls short. This isn't false modesty, he means it. And the later books will return to this theme constantly. Marcus criticizes himself for anger, distraction, complaining, caring what others think. The self-criticism can seem excessive to modern readers, but it makes sense in context. Book 1 establishes what excellence looks like. Apollonius' steadiness, Maximus' equanimity, Antoninus' mildness. Having seen the standard, Marcus knows exactly how far he falls short. The self-criticism of later books is comparison to these models, not to arbitrary ideals, but to people Marcus actually knew. The entries on Antoninus are especially detailed because Antoninus was the primary model. Every failing Marcus will note in himself can be measured against this portrait. The theme of fortune. Marcus thanks the gods for circumstances, good family, good teachers, preserved health. These were fortune, not achievement. This theme recurs throughout the meditations. The Stoics distinguish sharply between what's up to us and what isn't. Character is up to us, virtue is up to us, but circumstances, health, reputation, the behavior of others, life and death itself, these are not up to us. Book 1 performs the Stoic recognition of fortune. Look how much was given. Look how little you controlled. Your response to what happens is yours. What happens is not. This isn't fatalism. Marcus still acts, still strives, still attempts to improve himself in the empire, but he does so recognizing that outcomes aren't guaranteed. He received much. He'll try to use it well. Results remain uncertain. Next time, we enter Book 2 of the Meditations, And the tone shifts immediately. If Book 1 is gratitude, Book 2 is preparation for battle, not military battle, though Marcus may have been writing during the Marcomannic Wars. Psychological battle, the battle to maintain equanimity when everything conspires against it. Marcus opens Book 2 with one of the most famous passages in Stoic literature.
Begin the morning by saying to yourself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial.
Gone is the warm appreciation of teachers. Now we face the difficult others, the people who will test everything Book 1 acknowledged. But here's what's interesting. Book 2's strategy builds on Book 1's foundation. Marcus can face difficult people because he's grounded in what he received. The gratitude enables the endurance. We'll explore that connection in the next episode. Before we get there, I want to hear from you. What struck you in today's reading? Did Marcus's approach to gratitude resonate or feel foreign? Have you ever tried writing your own Book 1? What emerged? And I'll note that listeners will most likely raise a legitimate question about Book 1's silences. We'll continue to wrestle with what Marcus couldn't see, what his social position prevented him from acknowledging, and how philosophy emerges from particular circumstances even as it reaches for universal truth. Email your thoughts to the primary text at maaoot.org. That's the primary text at maaoot.org. Your questions and observations often shape how I approach these episodes. This is meant to be dialogue, not monologue. If you're finding value in these deep explorations of primary texts, I want to mention a few related resources. Abba Memorabili is our other podcast where we explore wisdom traditions in a more conversational format. Two hosts, Drake and Holly, discuss philosophy, consciousness, and transformation in dialogue. It's a different approach than what we do here. Less scholarly, more exploratory, some listeners enjoy both. The podcasts complement each other. We also have video content on our YouTube channel that approaches these themes visually. Shorter pieces, different angles. Worth checking out if you prefer that format for some of your learning. And if what you're hearing resonates, if you sense there's a more systematic approach to this kind of work that goes beyond listening to podcasts, you might explore maaoot.org. That's maaoot.org. The most ancient anamnetic order of Trikala offers comprehensive training in these wisdom traditions. Not just study, but practice. Not just philosophy, but integration of mind, body, and spirit. The approach is rigorous, personal, and transformative. It's not for everyone, but for those called to it, it's worth exploring. Now, a final thought. Marcus wrote Book 1 for himself. He never intended publication. He never imagined that nearly 2,000 years later, people around the world would read his private acknowledgments. And yet here we are, receiving what he wrote, learning from his gratitude, shaped, in our small way, by his willingness to name his debts. That's the chain of transmission. It extends through centuries, and it doesn't stop with us. What we receive, we pass on. What Marcus acknowledged, we now acknowledge. What his teachers gave him, we now inherit at several removes. There's something humbling in this. We're reading words that were never meant for us, written in a language most of us don't speak by a man who died nearly 2 millennia ago. And yet the words still work. They still teach. They still model something we can aspire to. Marcus didn't know Seneca personally. He was born after Epictetus died. He received their wisdom through books, through teachers who had absorbed it, through a tradition of practice that made their insights available to him. Now we do the same. We receive Marcus through translation, through commentary, through a tradition that kept his words alive across the fall of Rome, through the Dark Ages, through the Renaissance, to here, to now, to this moment where you're listening and I'm speaking, and somehow across all that distance the message arrives. That's what tradition means, not blind repetition, but living transmission. Not rule following, but inheritance. Not the dead hand of the past, but the living voice of accumulated wisdom, still speaking, still relevant, still capable of transforming whoever receives it with openness. I'll leave you with Marcus's own summary. The final line of Book 1.
For all these things require the help of the gods and fortune.
All things, not some things. All things, everything you are required help to become. Every capacity you have was cultivated by someone or something beyond yourself. Every possibility you'll realize depends on forces you don't control. This isn't fatalism, it's gratitude. Genuine gratitude. the recognition that we are not self-made, that we owe more than we can repay, that the proper response to receiving so much is not pride but humility and practice, and the attempt to be worthy of what we were given. The primary texts, complete engagement with philosophy's foundations. I'm Adam. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, keep practicing.